Someone says something about you and within a second your chest tightens, your jaw clenches, and you're already composing your defense before they've even finished speaking. You haven't heard the words yet. You've already started fighting them. And here's the costly mistake: you think the words are doing this to you. You think the criticism is the wound. It's not. The wound is your own judgment, the silent, split-second decision that what they said matters, that it means something about who you are, and that you need to stop it before it reaches you. Here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud: criticism can only hurt you if you first agree with it. Not consciously. Not out loud. But somewhere underneath, in that place you don't like to visit, you've already conceded that they might be right, and that concession, that tiny act of agreement, is what makes you flinch. You don't flinch because of what they say. You flinch because of what you believe about what they say. And that distinction, that gap between the words and your judgment of the words, is the entire game. Master that gap, and you become someone who cannot be shaken by anything anyone says about you. Fail to even see it, and you'll spend your whole life flinching. Let me walk you through what's actually happening in that moment. Someone opens their mouth. Sound waves hit your ears. Words form. And then, before those words have even been fully processed, something inside you moves. It's fast. It's faster than thought. Your body reacts before your mind catches up. Chest tight. Jaw locked. Maybe your face goes still, that controlled mask you put on when you're pretending you're fine. And already, you're building your counterargument. You're not listening anymore. You're defending. Epictetus understood this 2,000 years ago. He saw that people are not disturbed by things themselves but by the judgments they form about those things. Not the insult. Not the criticism. Not the feedback. The judgment. The silent interpretation that happens in the space between what someone says and what you feel. Think about what that means. It means the tightening in your chest isn't caused by their words. It's caused by your assessment of their words, by the meaning you assign to them in that fraction of a second. You hear criticism and instantly, automatically, your mind runs a calculation. Does this mean I'm bad? Does this mean I'm not enough? Does this mean they see through me? And if any part of you says yes, even a whisper of yes, the flinch follows. The anger follows. The defensiveness follows. Not because of the words. Because of the judgment. Most people call this being criticized. The Stoics would call it being conquered. Because in that moment, you've handed the keys to your inner state to someone else. You've let a sentence from another person's mouth determine how you feel about yourself. You've surrendered. Here's what nobody tells you about criticism: the content almost never matters as much as the source. Think about it. If a stranger on the internet calls you incompetent, you might feel a sting. If someone you deeply respect says the same thing, it hits you like a truck. Same words. Different source. Different impact. Why? Because the judgment you form is different. With the stranger, part of you dismisses them: they don't know me, they don't matter. With the person you respect, part of you amplifies them: they know things, they see things, maybe they're right. The words are identical. Your judgment changes everything. This is why the first practice of not flinching isn't about building a thicker skin or learning to brush things off. Those are surface-level tricks. They're bandages. The real practice starts with understanding that you are always, in every moment, making a judgment about whether criticism is true, and that judgment, not the criticism itself, is what you need to examine. So let's get concrete. Someone criticizes you. The first thing you do is nothing. Nothing. You don't respond. You don't explain. You don't defend. You don't counterattack. You don't smile politely to show it doesn't bother you. You don't do any of the things your body is screaming at you to do. You just sit with it. You receive the words and you let them sit in the room like furniture you haven't decided whether to keep yet. This is harder than it sounds. Your entire nervous system is built to react. Someone says something critical and your body treats it like a physical threat, like a hand reaching for your throat. The urge to respond is primal. It's a reflex. And that's exactly why the most powerful thing you can do in that moment is to break the reflex. To stay still. To stay quiet. To let the silence do what your words can't, which is to buy you time. In that silence, you do what Epictetus taught. You examine the impression. You take the criticism and you hold it up to the light and you ask, is this accurate? Not does it feel accurate, not does it trigger something in me, but is it actually, factually, verifiably true? Did I actually do what they said I did? Did I actually say what they said I said? Am I actually demonstrating the quality they're pointing at? If the answer is yes, if the criticism is accurate, then here's the reframe that changes everything: you've just been given a gift. Not a wound. A gift. Someone just showed you something about yourself that you couldn't see, or didn't want to see, and now you can. The Stoics didn't fear criticism. They feared the blind spots that criticism could illuminate. Seneca would say that being told the truth about yourself, even harshly, is better than being flattered into staying the same. Because flattery is the real enemy. Flattery is what keeps you stuck. Criticism, when accurate, is what breaks you open. But here's the critical part, and I mean critical in the truest sense: you don't absorb the criticism as identity. This is where most people fall apart. Someone says you're selfish, and instead of hearing you did a selfish thing, you hear you are a selfish person. Someone says you're lazy, and instead of hearing you were lazy in this moment, you hear you are lazy. Do you see the difference? One is about a behavior. The other is about your entire being. And the flinch, that tightening in your chest, comes from collapsing the two. From turning a comment about something you did into a verdict about everything you are. This is the pattern that's costing you. Every time you absorb criticism as identity, you shrink. You become less of yourself. You start organizing your behavior around avoiding the next criticism instead of around what you actually believe is right. You become a person shaped by other people's opinions rather than by your own principles. And that person, the one who's constantly adjusting to avoid being judged, that person doesn't feel whole. That person doesn't feel like you. Because that person isn't you. That person is a construction built from everyone else's reactions. The truth nobody wants to say out loud is that most of your suffering around criticism isn't about the criticism at all. It's about the story you tell yourself after the criticism. The words land, and then your mind starts writing a narrative. This means I'm not good enough. This means they don't respect me. This means everyone probably thinks this. This means I need to prove myself. And within minutes, a single sentence from another person has become a full-blown identity crisis. Not because the sentence was that powerful. Because you are that unguarded. So the practice, the real, daily, unglamorous practice, is to stop collapsing behavior into identity. When criticism comes, you separate. This thing I did was flawed. That doesn't mean I am flawed. This choice was wrong. That doesn't mean I am wrong. You hold the specific action up to examination without letting it touch the foundation of who you are. The Stoics had a word for this. They called it the inner citadel. The part of you that cannot be touched by external events, by other people's words, by the verdicts of the crowd. It's not a wall. It's not numbness. It's the part of you that knows who you are regardless of what anyone says about you. And the practice of not flinching is really the practice of living from that citadel. Of standing in it so firmly that criticism passes through you without shaking the structure. Now, if the criticism is not accurate, if what they've said is simply wrong, or deliberately cruel, or rooted in their own projection, then the reframe is even simpler. It's not about you. It never was. Someone who lies about you or distorts you is not describing you. They're describing themselves. They're showing you their own character, their own resentment, their own need to diminish someone else to feel bigger. And the Stoic response to that is not anger. Anger would mean you've accepted their frame, that what they said has enough weight to warrant your emotional investment. The response is silence. Or, if you must respond, humor. Because humor does something remarkable, it shows that the criticism didn't land. It shows that you're standing outside of it, looking at it, unbothered. And it denies the critic the one thing they actually want, your distress. Seneca wrote about anger as though it were the most dangerous of all the passions, and he was right. Anger is what happens when you've accepted the false belief that you've been harmed by something outside your control. But you haven't been harmed. Not really. Someone said words. The words had no physical force. They carried no actual weight. The only way they harm you is if you pick them up and carry them. And you don't have to. That's not theory. That's a choice you make in the gap between the words and your response. The gap. Always the gap. The space between what happens to you and what you do about it. That space is where your entire life is lived. Most people don't even know it exists. They think the words and the reaction are the same thing, one causes the other, automatically, like a reflex. But they're not. There's a space between them. And in that space lives every ounce of freedom you'll ever have. Epictetus knew this. He was born a slave. He was beaten. He was eventually exiled. And he understood, more deeply than almost anyone who's ever lived, that the one thing no one could take from him was the space between impression and response. The Romans could chain his body. They could not chain that gap. They could not make him agree with their judgment of him. They could not make him flinch. So when someone criticizes you, and you feel that familiar tightening, here's what you do. You notice it. You notice the tightening. You notice the jaw. You notice the urge to respond. And then you don't. You let the tightening be there without acting on it. You let the urge rise without following it. You breathe into the space between their words and your response, and you stay there for as long as it takes. 10 seconds. 30 seconds. A minute. However long you need. And in that space, you ask the only questions that matter. Is this true? Is this useful? Does this person have standing to say this? Do they know me? Do they care about me? Do they have the experience and the character to make this assessment worth considering? Because here's what nobody tells you, most criticism isn't worth your response. Not because you're above it. Not because you're too good for feedback. But because most criticism is not actually about you. It's about the critic. It's about their bad day, their insecurity, their need to feel important, their habit of tearing things down because building things is harder. And if you respond to every piece of criticism as though it carries equal weight, you'll spend your life being pulled in 100 directions by people who don't know you, don't care about you, and won't remember what they said by tomorrow. This is why the source matters more than the content. Not all criticism is created equal. A criticism from someone who knows you, who has earned the right to speak into your life, who has demonstrated that they want you to be better, that criticism deserves your full attention. You sit with it. You examine it. You let it do its work. Even if it stings. Even if it's hard to hear. Because that sting is the feeling of a blind spot being illuminated. That sting is growth. But criticism from someone who doesn't know you, who has no investment in your growth, who is speaking from spite or envy or boredom, that criticism deserves nothing. Not anger. Not a counter-argument. Not even acknowledgement. Nothing. Because nothing is the only response that doesn't reward the behavior. The moment you get angry, they've won. The moment you explain yourself, they've won. The moment you change your behavior to avoid their judgment, they've won. But the moment you receive their words in silence, examine them, find them empty, and let them fall to the ground, in that moment, you are free. Let me say that again because it's the heart of everything. You receive the words. You examine them. You find them empty. And you let them fall. You don't carry them. You don't build a case against them. You don't lie awake at 3 in the morning replaying the conversation and crafting the perfect comeback. You let them fall. Because they were never yours to carry. The pattern of flinching, of tightening, of defending, of absorbing, that pattern is costing you more than you know. It's costing you your peace. It's costing you your clarity. It's costing you the ability to hear feedback that could actually make you better, because you've trained yourself to treat all criticism as a threat. And when everything is a threat, you can't distinguish between the knife that's attacking you and the scalpel that's trying to heal you. So you reject both. And you stay the same. And you wonder why you still don't feel whole, why you still don't feel like you're growing, why you still feel like you're living inside a suit of armor that protects you from everything including your own evolution. The armor is the problem. The flinch is the armor. And the armor isn't protecting you. It's imprisoning you. Here's what the practice looks like in daily life. You're in a meeting. Someone says your work isn't good enough. The tightening comes. You feel the heat in your face. You feel the words forming in your throat. And instead of speaking, you pause. You take a breath. You look at the person. And you say something simple. Something like, "Let me think about that." Or, "I hear you." Or nothing at all. You don't agree. You don't disagree. You simply receive. And then later, not in the moment, but later, when the adrenaline has cleared and your judgment is your own, you sit down and you examine what was said. Was it accurate? Did they point to something real? Is there something here I need to change? Or was this about them? You separate the examination from the reception. You receive in the moment. You examine in the silence. You respond only if the examination shows that a response is warranted. And most of the time, it isn't. Most of the time, the most powerful thing you can do with criticism is to let it pass through you like wine through a column. It comes. It goes. It touches nothing structural. This is what it means to take criticism without flinching. Not to never feel the tightening. Not to be a stone. You'll feel it. You're human. The tightening will come. The jaw will clench. The urge to defend will rise. But you won't follow it. You won't let it drive the car. You'll feel the flinch building and you'll choose, consciously, deliberately, in that sacred gap, not to complete it. You'll leave it unfinished. And an unfinished flinch is not a flinch at all. It's just a sensation. A passing weather pattern in the body. It comes. It goes. And you're still standing. Marcus Aurelius dealt with this every single day. He was the most powerful man in the world, and he was surrounded by people who wanted things from him, who resented him, who criticized him, who whispered about him in corridors. He wrote to himself, in his private notes, reminders that the things people say about you are not facts. They are opinions. And opinions are the property of the people who hold them, not the people they're about. Someone's opinion of you is not yours. It doesn't belong to you. You don't have to pick it up. You don't have to carry it. You don't have to organize your life around it. It's theirs. Let them keep it. Carl Jung saw this too, from a different angle. He understood that what triggers you most violently in other people's criticism is often the thing you haven't made peace with inside yourself. The criticism that makes you flinch the hardest is the one that touches a doubt you've been avoiding. Not because the critic is right, but because you've left that door unlocked. You've left that part of yourself unexamined. And when someone points at it, even inaccurately, the alarm goes off. So the deeper practice, beyond examining the criticism, is to examine the flinch itself. Why did this particular comment land so hard? What is it touching? What am I afraid it might be true? This is uncomfortable work. It's much easier to just get angry at the critic. Anger feels like strength. It feels like fighting back. But it's not strength. It's reactivity. It's the weakest thing you can do because it means you've been moved by someone else's words. Real strength is stillness. Real strength is receiving the criticism, holding it, examining it, and deciding, from your own center, not from your wounds, whether it deserves a place in your life. So here's the full practice. I want you to internalize this. Not as a concept. As a behavior. The next time someone criticizes you, you do 3 things. First, you receive in silence. No defense. No counterattack. No performance of being unaffected. Just silence. Real silence. The kind that makes the other person uncomfortable because they expected a reaction and you gave them space instead. Second, you examine. Later. Alone. Without the pressure of the moment. You ask, is this true? Is this useful? Does this come from someone whose judgment I trust? And third, you decide. You decide whether to act on it, whether to discard it, or whether to simply let it sit, unanswered, unabsorbed, uncarried. Most people skip every step. They hear criticism and go straight to reaction. They don't receive in silence. They don't examine later. They don't decide. They just react. And the reaction becomes the response, and the response becomes the pattern, and the pattern becomes the life. A life spent flinching. A life spent defending. A life spent being shaped by every voice that ever said something unkind. You don't have to live that way. You were not built to live that way. The Stoics proved this not in classrooms but in exile, in war, in the arena of actual human suffering. Epictetus proved it as a slave. Seneca proved it in the courts of an emperor who eventually ordered his death. Marcus Aurelius proved it while carrying the weight of an empire on his shoulders and the whispers of traitors in his ears. These were not men who never heard criticism. They were men who learned to stand in the storm of it without moving. Not because they were numb. Because they understood the gap. Because they refused to agree with judgments that didn't deserve their assent. Because they knew that the words of others are wind, and that the only thing that can actually harm you is your own decision to be harmed. That decision, that silent, automatic, unexamined decision, is what you need to bring into the light. You need to see it. You need to catch it in the act. The next time your chest tightens and your jaw clenches and the defense starts composing itself before the sentence is even finished, you need to hear yourself. You need to see the machinery. And then you need to reach into the gap, that space between their words and your response, and you need to choose. Not the reflex. Not the flinch. Not the defense. You choose the silence. You choose the examination. You choose the stillness that says, I heard you. And I will decide what your words mean. You don't decide that for me. Because that's what this is really about. Sovereignty. Not the false sovereignty of shouting back or proving them wrong. The real sovereignty of deciding what gets in. Of standing at the gate of your own mind and saying, I will examine this. I will weigh this. I will determine whether this has utility or whether it is noise. And I will do that from my own center, not from my wounds. You are not at the mercy of every tongue that moves. You never were. You just didn't know there was a gap. Now you do. And the gap is yours. Criticism can only hurt you if you first agree with it. If you refuse to agree, if you hold the impression up to the light and withhold your assent until you've truly examined it, then the words have no handle. There's nothing to grab. Nothing to carry. They pass through you and they keep going and you're still standing exactly where you were, unchanged, ungoverned, whole. That's the practice. Not a one-time fix. A daily discipline. A way of relating to every word spoken about you, every criticism, every insult, every judgment, as something that must earn its way into your mind before it's allowed to touch you. Most things won't earn it. Some things will, and those things will make you better. But you'll only be able to tell the difference if you've learned to stand in the silence and look. So the next time someone says something about you, and you feel it starting, the tightening, the clenching, the heat, the defense rising, remember this. The wound isn't in the words. The wound is in the welcome. Don't welcome it. Examine it. And if it doesn't deserve a place in your life, let it fall where it landed. Not yours. Never was. Stay unflinching.